that you are very well, healthy, and safe in the proximity of your loved ones. We thank you in advance for joining us for this webinar, Security Scorecard's Cyber Rating and Continuous Monitoring Solution. At GMSEC, we recognize how critical it is to keep our operations functional in such a complex time as this by understanding the challenges of information security and adding to the daily challenges of this contingency. GMSEC and its partners will be offering weekly webinars over the next few weeks to help our partners successfully navigate this time through conversations aimed at protecting their sensitive information, their customers' information, and maintaining a secure remote connection. Today's conversation is developed jointly between GM SecTech and Security Scorecard. We would like to take a moment to tell you a little bit more about the organizers of this webinar. GM Security Technologies is a company with 50 years in the computer security industry. We create innovative solutions that help accelerate business progress in the areas of services, business continuity, integrated security, physical and technological, cybersecurity, as well as a process for automation and orchestration. Their principles of simplicity, innovation, and customer success have made them the leading and fastest growing security and technology provider in Northern Latin America. Security Scorecard is a global leader in cybersecurity ratings and the only service with over 1.3 million companies continuously rated. The Security Scorecard platform is used by over 1,000 organizations around the world for third-party risk management, cyber risk monitoring, board reporting, regulatory compliance, and cyber insurance underwriting. Some specifics about Security Scorecard's mission. They deliver cyber ratings, can be used to continuously monitor third parties, can be used to monitor and manage cybersecurity in your environments, help organizations understand and manage their compliance with regulations such as PCI, and help customers deal with the challenges presented by the COVID-19 crisis. Some general rules of engagement for the presentation. There's going to be a 45-minute presentation, and at the end, we will have a 10-minute question and answer session through chat messages. If you have any questions at any point during the presentation, we invite you to write them down in the chat so that we can answer them at the end. We will have all the lines muted during the presentation, and without further ado, we have here from Security Scorecard, Alex Rich, Senior Director of Alliances Market Development. Alex?
Thank you, Rencio. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's Thursday is off to a good start. My name is Alex Rich, calling in today from New York, New York. I've been with Security Scorecard for about 2.5 years now, previously holding roles on both our customer success and sales teams. And I'm here today to tell you about the Security Scorecard platform, what it does, how it can be used, and the value it can generate for you and your teams. So for starters, a little bit about our corporate history. We were founded in 2014, so been on the block for about 6 years now. We are headquartered in New York with offices and remote employees across the globe. We've raised $112 million across 4 rounds of funding. Our investors include the likes of Google Ventures, Sequoia, Moody's, and most recently Riverwood Capital. And as for our story, it starts with 2 gentlemen, Alex and Sam. Those are our co-founders. Both are former CISOs, and at the time, were working at a company called Gilt Group. And at that time, there were 2 things that were really keeping Alex and Sam up at night. First and foremost, they were overwhelmed by the volume of vendor assessments that they were required to do. And secondarily, they didn't really trust the accuracy and the completeness of the information they were getting from their vendors. So they came together and they asked themselves a question. Can we instantly and non-intrusively measure security of any company in the world and show it how to improve? And the answer to that question was yes, and that's what led to the birth of Security Scorecard in our company. So what are we, what do we do, and why do we matter? Security Scorecard is the leading provider of cyber risk ratings, and the best way to describe a cyber rating is to think about a credit rating. However, instead of measuring a company's financial health, we measure their cybersecurity posture and strength. And we can draw that type of parallel because if you think about it, both credit and financial risks are universal to all companies and fundamental to a company's stability and ability to operate. Same can be said about cyber risks. You may be the best at what you do, have great margins, a steady stream of customers. However, if you can't manage cash flows or you can't protect your sensitive data from a breach or an adversary, none of it really matters. All those positive things you're doing can get flushed down the toilet very quickly. So we are the industry leader with respect to the total number of companies scored, currently at about 1.3 million, and that number continues to grow by the day. We serve over 1,000 customers. We're the #1 cyber rating solution according to Gartner, and have an award-winning customer success team, and we are the only true continuous monitoring solution on the market. So how does this platform work? At a high level, we need to do two things as a cyber rating provider. We need to identify the assets that belong to a company, and then we need to monitor those assets and grade the signals that are coming from them. Internally, we refer to these processes as attribution and collection. These processes are run in parallel, and they are both continuous processes, meaning we never stop doing them. So with respect to attribution, it starts with a company's top-level domain. You feed that to us, and then we go out there and we discover all the sub-related and affiliate domains that belong to that domain and that company. And once we've identified all those domains, which I'm going to call the domain footprint, we then go and find all the IPs that support those domains. And this forms what we refer to as the digital footprint. It's a list of all the domains and IPs that belong to a company. Now, with respect to collection, which again is running in parallel, we have a globally distributed network of active and passive scanners. These scanners are effectively crawling all of IPv4, and what we do is we walk up to every port on every server, we do a port scan, a banner grab, and then a fingerprint, and we drop all of those results into our massive data lake. We're doing other forms of collection as well, looking at things like SSL certificates, domains, pretty much anything you can think of. So at this point, we have to match the signals to the companies. And we can do that by using the domains and IPs that we've attributed to the company through their digital footprint and comparing them to the domains and IPs that are attached to the signals that we've collected in the collection process. So once we've tied signals to companies, we grade the signals. We render an overall score. We call it a top-level grade. It's got both a alpha and a numeric component. So A through F, think grade school report card, 0 to 100. Benefit of that scale is it really makes sense to anyone, right? You don't need a computer science degree to understand that. And in addition to an overall grade, we create what we call 10 factor grades, which you could see down here in this bottom right corner. The best way to describe a factor grade is it's a grade on a certain vector of security, like domain health or application security, so on and so forth. And with respect to the relationship between the factor grades and the overall grade is essentially a weighted average of the 10 factor grades. So what do these grades mean? How should we treat them? How should we think about them? So on and so forth. Look, at the end of the day, anyone looking at a grade, whether it be a grade on themselves or a third party, their ultimate goal is to try to understand the risk of breach, right? We can help them understand the risk of breach because we've been able to establish a statistically defensible correlation between our grades and breach risk. So how did we do this? Essentially, we partnered with all the industry leaders in the catastrophe modeling space. These folks have the largest databases of breach disclosures. So what we do is we look at the breaches that they've recorded and then look at the grades of the companies that were breached in our system around the time of the breach. And with that study, we've been able to prove, and third parties have validated, that any company in our system that has a grade of C or below is 5 times more likely to be breached than a company with a grade of A or B. So let's talk use cases. We've got a lot of them, and they all have a common thread. They involve understanding the cybersecurity posture and risks of a company, whether it be your own company or a third party. So what I have listed here are the primary use cases that we see our customers leveraging our tool for. This list does continue to grow. When I started at this company, there are far fewer tiles here, and there are likely use cases taking place right now that we're not aware of. So I expect this list to be bigger in the near future. So as for the primary use cases, we've got procurement and contract negotiation. So basically, procurement teams use Scorecard to evaluate the security of the vendors under consideration. We also see procurement teams inserting grade requirements into their vendor contracts to ensure the vendors continue to meet the company's security requirements. Vendor risk management, or continuous monitoring, VRM. Monitoring the vendors in use by a company to ensure they're maintaining security standards. Most VRM programs are going to have established what we call criticality tiers. They're the output of an inherent risk assessment. Common nomenclature would be high critical, medium critical, low critical. And essentially what folks do is they assign a grade requirement for each vendor tier, and then they monitor the vendor to ensure they're maintaining the required grade target requirement, that's tied to their tier. Self-monitoring. Essentially, this involves using Security Scorecard to monitor your own company. So we've got a pretty unique and compelling value proposition for self-monitoring in that most of the tools that an organization is going to use to defend themselves, they live inside the network and they point outward. Scorecard, on the other hand, we live outside and we look inward. We're essentially giving you the vantage point of the would-be adversary so you can augment and configure your defenses accordingly. This vantage point also gives you the added benefit of being able to gauge the efficacy of your security programs, configurations, and investments. Are they having the intended consequence? Are you meeting the goals that you set out when you decided to make those investments? Next up, we have vendor onboarding. So this involves using Scorecard to vet and understand the security of a vendor being onboarded. Pretty similar to the vendor risk management use case, except it's a little bit earlier in the vendor risk management lifecycle. M&A, or mergers and acquisitions. This involves understanding the security of a company that is being considered for acquisition. Does this company meet your standards? Will they cause problems upon integration? If you take the recent example of Marriott and SPG, where the reservation system that was taken into the SPG environment by Marriott and ended up resulting into a breach, could have been a very good opportunity to kind of sniff that out at the outset with a tool like this. And then the last use case I have up here is cyber insurance. So this use case kind of has two elements to it. First and foremost, we're used by the underwriters who are underwriting cyber policies. They're essentially using our grades in their underwriting models to make policy decisions and pricing decisions. Conversely, we're also going to be used by the policy holders who want to ensure that they've been priced fairly and in accordance with their risk. So, company A gets a policy for $10 a month, company B gets a policy for 12. Is company B actually more risky than company A? And as for validation, we aren't the only ones that think ratings are important. The market is recognizing the value of these ratings and the value they provide and is adopting them at a pretty impressive clip. Gartner named ratings as a top 10 security project for 2019. We expect that we will be part of this list, the 2020 list, upon its release. And Gartner also made a statement that they project that by 2022, cyber ratings are going to be as ubiquitous and relied upon as the credit rating. So in short, these ratings are not going anywhere. Adoption is strong, and the number of use cases that we're going to see is only going to increase in the future. So as for customers, we have a lot of them, and we're very proud of the company we keep. So as it stands, we have about 1,000 customers at the moment who are monitoring about 150,000 companies. Our customers span all shapes, sizes, verticals, geographies, from the SMB to the Fortune 100. Our retention rate is industry leading, and most of our customers use us for multiple use cases. And while many of you are probably hearing about us for the first time, we have amassed a pretty impressive roster of customers in the LATAM region. LATAM and Caribbean are primary focuses of ours in 2020, and we hope that our partnership with GM SecTech is proof of our commitment to the region and to all of you. So let's talk about the third-party challenge. Long story short, the build versus buy decision has been made. And what I mean by that is when a company has a need, they don't develop it internally. They go out and they contract with a best-in-class provider. And it's not just the size of the vendor ecosystem that creates a challenge, and the size has grown quite large because everyone is outsourcing. It's the way in which we leverage vendors that elevates the risks that are created by third parties. In most scenarios, when a company uses a vendor to perform a service, they either share sensitive data with them or provision them with access to their network. It's a necessary evil for the vendor to provide its service. However, it creates a scenario where vendors are really becoming an extension of your attack perimeters. And unlike our true attack perimeter, which we can monitor and control, we do not have that same level of visibility and control over a third party that we enjoy with respect to our own organizations. Here's a visual that represents the challenge at hand. It's very easy to see how quickly a problem tied to one of your third parties can make its way to your doorstep and become your problem. Fourth parties as well. And if you're looking for proof that this problem is as serious and pervasive as I'm making it out to be, look no further. The numbers do not lie. 70% of reported breaches are triggered by a third party. Now, let that sink in for a second. We're at the point where third parties do more damage and pose a bigger risk to us than we do ourselves. Some other statistics, 71% of companies surveyed admit they are not adequately managing third-party risk. 90% of anti-corruption actions by the Department of Justice involve a third party. And the penalties are massive. We've seen fines in the ballpark of $800 million for GDPR, and these stories are only going to continue to fill up our news feeds. So third-party security is not a novel idea, right? Many companies are painfully aware of the severity of the problem that I just painted and have invested time, money, and effort into solving it. Most companies who invest in VRM use some combination of penetration tests, security questionnaires, on-site assessments, third-party attestations like a SOC to kind of assess and manage the security of their third-party ecosystems and vendors. Now, don't get me wrong, these activities all have value. They are not going anywhere, and they really shouldn't. However, there are a couple common challenges, let's call it 3, across all these activities that Scorecard addresses directly.
Hey, Alex.
Yeah.
You may want to advance the slide. I think we're one behind on 13 on your talking points.
You're one. Oh, no, this is, are you seeing third-party assessment challenges?
Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Go ahead, continue.
Yeah, I was getting to that point. Sorry about that. So, like I said, these activities have value. They're not going anywhere, but there are kind of 3 common challenges across all of them that we address directly. So first and foremost, these methods involve taking static measurements of cybersecurity, which is one of the most dynamic things out there. Let's take the questionnaire as an example, right? The responses you provided on the questionnaire may be valid the day it was filled out, but fast forward a week, a month, even a couple of days, I'll bet you some of those responses are no longer valid. Issue number 2, these methods have a lot of room for both bias and human error, right? Like take the SOC report as an example. Companies provide actual instructions to employees during the SOC period about how to behave, what to do, so on and so forth. So the output is favorable, right? Do we really think this is a true measurement of company security? And then last but not least, these methods are costly, time-consuming, labor-intensive, which I guess isn't a deal breaker on its own. But if you think about the size of the typical vendor ecosystem, performing all these activities on all of your vendors, it's very easy to see how things can get unmanageable from a cost and time standpoint very quickly.
Alex.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I think you're still one slide behind. Sorry about this. I think you're in the third-party bridge. Now, that's the one that you should be talking now.
Are you looking at third-party assessment challenges?
No, we're seeing COVID. Now we're seeing the third-party assessment challenges.
I see. Okay.
That's the COVID-19 challenges now.
You see, okay, but now you see third-party assessment challenges.
No, I see COVID-19 challenges.
Okay. So, what about now?
Now you're in 14, slide 14, third-party assessment challenges, correct.
Okay.
Now, there you go, now in 14, page 14 now. Okay.
So, sorry, I lost my train of thought. All right, so we address all those challenges head on, right? So we're a continuous monitoring solution that's keeping pace with the dynamic nature of cybersecurity. We have no biases, right? Our scanners don't have friends at companies who they want to win a contract, and they don't make human type mistakes. And our grades are available on demand without effort at a fraction of the cost of some of the activities that we're speaking to here. So in addition to the traditional third-party challenges, COVID-19 has presented us with a set of new challenges.
One more slide, Alex, sorry. Now you're on third-party assessment. Go ahead and go to one more slide to COVID-19 slide. Good, leave it there, perfect.
Okay. So in it, yeah, sorry, there's some type of delay on mine. I'm showing something different. Bear with me 1 second. Has that changed it? Are you looking at COVID-19 now?
No, we're looking at SSC for VRM, actionable ROI.
I apologize, gentlemen. Let me just stop and reset this really
Sure.
quickly.
There, leave it there. Oh, never mind.
Which screen is currently up?
Speaker notes.
Speaker notes is up.
Correct.
That's not what I'm intending to do. Sorry. And how about now?
Nothing right now. Oh, hold on, it's coming. COVID-19. We're good.
Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. All right, we should be back on track now. Nothing like a little technology challenge in front of 40 people.
Too true. Too true.
So in addition to traditional third-party challenges, COVID has presented us with a set of new challenges, some tied to third parties, others not, but all directly solvable with Security Scorecard. So what types of impact is COVID having? So for starters, any SaaS vendor that supports remote communication and collaboration, those are now considered critical, since we can't really operate without them in this new world. And now that they're critical, they warrant a higher level of scrutiny. And then for the companies that don't have a tech stack in place to support a remote environment, they're rushing to onboard vendors that they need to support the remote environment. However, they don't have access to the time to evaluate and onboard these vendors since the needs are immediate, and they don't have the ability to assess the vendor the way they would a normal critical vendor, because many of the activities that they typically run to assess a critical, like on-site, are no longer an option. So in terms of our solution, SSE can be used to continuously monitor the vendors that are now critical. In terms of the onboarding challenge, we can support the virtual and instant onboarding of a new vendor. And then outside of those two challenges, there are certain issues like malware that can make a company vulnerable in a work from home environment. Scorecard has the ability to scan for those, both on your own company or on your vendor, and alert you to gaps that require your attention and your action. So let's talk about SSE for VRM, right? VRM programs love us because we provide instant and tangible ROI. Our solution is translating instantly into time-based and monetary savings for companies. So in terms of some sources of ROI, first and foremost, we help shorten the onboarding cycle. You can use grades to confidently bypass activities that are deemed unnecessary because the company's score is strong, right?
Yeah, you need to move to the next slide. Perfect.
Okay. Yeah, it's not. I'm looking one behind you, so I'm not really sure what to read off of.
Right. Yep. So you're on SSC for PCI right now, gap analysis.
Am I on SSC for VRM now?
Let's give it a second. There seems to be a lag, right? So we're still seeing the SSC for PCI gap. Maybe refresh on your side. I don't know.
All right, give me a second. I'm gonna trigger a refresh.
So now just launch again. Perfect.
I'm at the beginning, so let me just go back to where I was.
Sure.
Are you looking at the VRM slide now?
We are indeed. Yes.
Okay.
Actionable ROI.
Great. All right. So going back to it, VRM programs love this tool because we provide instant and tangible ROI, both in terms of dollars spent and time spent. So I spoke about shortening the onboarding cycle by using grades to confidently bypass certain activities. We can also use this tool to eliminate unnecessary reassessments. So think about most VRM programs with respect to the lower criticality tier of vendor. They typically do something that involves sending a questionnaire to the same vendor every year on a certain date. Instead of doing that blindly, why not configure a workflow where you only send the questionnaire if the vendor score drops or gives you some form of concern, right? Use it as that sniff test to eliminate unnecessary activities. Reducing the usage of costly third parties. Again, in similar vein to strategy one, but here we only reserve the costly activities like a pen test if for vendors that score low in the platform and highlight a need to go do pen testing instead of doing it on everyone, right? On the subject of pen testing, we actually have a use case for it as well. We like to talk about how Scorecard can help right-size them, meaning instead of trying to penetrate all vectors, focus on the ones that show weakness at the factor score level and only test those. As for lower tier vendors, the tier threes, if you will, since the risk is low, tailor your assessments and your efforts accordingly, right? Use a score and move on. And then last but not least, RFPs. Instead of going down the path with 5, 6 parties and ultimately only selecting one of them, eliminate folks at the outset who won't cut it from a security standpoint and be efficient. Focus on the people who actually have a chance of being onboarded. PCI. And I know PCI is top of mind for a lot of people in the room. So we've got a pretty innovative and lightweight approach to PCI gap assessment and enablement. We don't just do this for PCI, we really do it for all the big frameworks. So think NIST, ISO, GDPR, HIPAA, et cetera, et cetera. So what do? We're essentially isolating the controls that we can assess from the outside. So as an example, we can't assess the strength of a company's internal password policy by port scanning a server. However, we can gauge the efficacy of its patching program by doing that, right? So what we essentially do is we map the controls that we can assess to the relevant issues in the platform that help us understand if the control is being passed or failed, right? So if a control is must-have patching program, if there are vulnerabilities everywhere that are showing up in the scorecard, that's a fail of that control. So with this methodology and this strategy, we give you an instant snapshot of first and third-party compliance against any of those frameworks, as well as the ability to monitor first and third-party compliance with the framework continuously, because again, this is a continuous solution. And last but not least, on subject of PCI, if PCI 4.0 does have the continuous assurance requirement that most folks think it will, we give you an option or a way to satisfy that requirement directly, right? Continuous assurance, continuous monitoring, box checked. SSE for self-monitoring. Like I said earlier, we're unique when it comes to self because we give you what we call the hacker eye view. You can understand what the adversary you are protecting yourself from can see, and then you can augment and enhance your defenses accordingly. So in terms of what we do specifically, we identify all of your publicly facing assets and we track them for you. Shadow IT is a huge problem for many companies. Many folks don't even know where all of their assets reside, so we're a great solution for that specific problem. We grade the signals coming from your company in accordance with NIST and other industry-leading frameworks. We surface actionable IP level detail for all issues to support validation and ultimately remediation. We establish security targets with grades and help you build remediation plans to hit that target. So if your company is currently at a C, select A as your target and we'll show you all the issues that you would need to remediate in order to get there. We give you visibility into your historical scores, and we go beyond just giving you grades at certain points in time. We give you access to a detailed view of all the issues that were present in your environment at that point in time. So really give you a sense of what things were like in the past. And last but not least, we give you a solution to communicate your security and your posture to internal stakeholders, non-technical audiences. It has the big benefit of helping you really manage your cybersecurity reputation. So at this point, that kind of concludes my presentation. We're going to move on to a demo of the platform momentarily. So it would be great if folks could stick around for that part. I'm going to just quickly flip through a few screenshots here that I'm going to then pop open in the platform. All right, So let's move over to the platform. Bear with me. Can you guys see my screen? You should be looking at a scorecard that says Morningstar on it.
No, I do not see the screen yet.
Do you see anything?
I see a blank, a black screen. You may want to do application view.
Try that one more time. How about now?
No, it's just blank. It's just black. Oh, now it just popped in. Just popped in. You're good to go.
All right. Oh. Okay, so what I have up here is an actual scorecard, right? So we're looking at a company called Morningstar here. And let's start by taking note of that overall grade in the top left corner. Like I said earlier, it's got the numeric and alphanumeric component to it. And then down here are those 10 factor grades I had alluded to. And again, these are grades on certain areas of security. Another way of thinking about it is they're groupings of related issue types. So I've now expanded the factor view to review all of the issues that we look for within each factor. Across all factors, we look for about 93 unique issue types. And with respect to the view I have up in front of me, any issue type that is blackened with a number next to it indicates that we've detected a finding for it. If something is gray, we haven't. Other thing to call out here is you'll notice that I have high severity, medium, and low severity issues. So we rank our issues in the way we score and treat them predominantly in accordance with NIST, but we also take into account the other leading frameworks. So that's what we typically use to inform our severity. And then on the right-hand side, you'll notice we have two other types of signals. We have positive signals and informational findings. Positive signals, they are what they sound like they are. They're good things that a company is doing. However, they do not impact score because we can't afford to cover up an issue with a good thing because that would essentially hide some of the risk that a company presents. And then informational findings are typically findings that live on shared infrastructure, so it's difficult to attribute them to a specific company, or they're things that we just don't have the highest degree of confidence with. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to click into an issue. So it looks like this company has 103 findings of a medium severity vulnerability. So we have here is what we call an issue page. And with respect to the issue page, we give a description of the issue, what we deem to be the risk, what we recommend you do, and then down here are the specific findings that we've detected. Before I go there, I want to just speak to comparison to similar companies. If you think about one of the challenges that we have with a platform like this, it's that we're grading companies of all different shapes and sizes, right? And we need to come up with a grading system that lets us fairly compare companies to one another. Now, hypothetically, if we have two companies, one that has one machine and one that has millions, which are you going to expect to have more issues? It's the bigger one, right? Because they have a larger attack surface. So what we do is we normalize for our attack surface by putting companies into cohorts, which are groupings of other companies with a similar IP account. So what I'm showing you here is this company compared to its cohort, what percent of companies in the cohort have the issue, what don't? And then specifically as for finding counts, what is the average finding count for this issue type in the cohort? And how many does this company have? In this example, they have more than the average, so that's going to magnify the impact that the issue has on their score. Conversely, if it was less, it would mitigate. Now, we have in our platform what we refer to as an open feedback loop, meaning we give people the ability to challenge issues that we've detected. We do the same on the digital footprint page, which lists all the assets. I'll go to that next. And in terms of reasons for challenge, we offer a couple. So here I'm selecting an issue, clicking resolve, which initiates the challenge workflow. Reasons for challenging. You fix this. Now, that might be a little confusing to some since this is a continuous monitoring solution. We scan for different issues at different cadences. Some can be scanned daily, some can be every 30 days. So if you go and fix an issue that's scanned, let's say every 30 days, you have two options, right? You can wait for our scanners to come back around, and at that point, we'll appreciate the issue's been resolved. and we'll remove it, or you tell us you fixed it. Couple other interesting reasons. I have a compensating control. Now, remember, we have an
Hey,
outside.
Alex, real quick, it seems like you're frozen on resolve issue finding. Are
Yeah,
you
that's
hitting the drop down?
intentional.
Okay, got it.
I did hit the drop down. It's not showing.
No, not yet. That's why
All right.
I wanted you to re-hit it.
I think there's just some lag here, so just bear with me. Give it a second.
Will do.
Okay. So another reason for resolution is having a compensating control. So think about a situation where, I don't know, maybe I detect an end-of-life product on one of your publicly facing machines. Now, from my vantage point, without added context from your company, that seems like it's a problem and a vulnerability, but maybe I don't know you've bought an end-of-life agreement and you're still receiving patches behind the scenes. And then last but not least, another reason is this is not my IP or domain. Again, you have the ability to challenge IP or domain attribution. I'll show you that in the next page. So if the asset doesn't belong to you, of course the issue doesn't. However, instead of just resolving all the issues tied to the asset, much more efficient to go to the digital footprint section and resolve the asset there. So once one of these reasons are selected, it kicks off an investigation by our support team. So we have a dedicated team of support engineers whose role at the company is to review and investigate challenges such as these. Once we've conducted our investigation, we'll come up with a response. We can't just say yes to everything because that would degrade the quality of the data in the platform. But once we've come up with a resolution, we have the ability to update the platform, meaning remove the issue if we agree and update the score within 48 hours, which is an industry-leading statistic. All right, so that's resolving. Orencio, are you still seeing these
Yeah, I
issues?
saw you move. You're good. You're now on the back page, so you're good. Medium severity.
Cool. All right, I'm going to move now to the digital footprint because I've made mention to that on a few occasions. So again, the digital footprint lists all the assets that we've attributed to an organization. Again, a lot of companies use this part of the platform simply for asset discovery. So what I have here is first our summary view, which shows a heat map of where the IPs are located. Down here is the actual inventory list. And I believe I mentioned this earlier in the presentation, but if I didn't, I apologize. One of our big commitments as a company is to what we refer to as trust and transparency, which means that whenever we surface an issue, like I just showed you, we give you all the information that we collected to identify it's an issue, and it's enough information for you to go out there, validate that the issue is in fact accurate, and hopefully remediate it. We have the same commitment with respect to the digital footprint page. And what I mean by that is whenever we surface an asset, we tell you how we went about attributing it. We use one of 6 methodologies, which you can see here on the right-hand side. We'll show a check mark next to the methodology we used in this specific example. And then we give you the supporting detail from the methodology that prove to us that this asset in fact belongs to your company. One other quick thing I'll show you here is it's something we recently introduced. It's called asset-centric view. Not relevant in this example because there are no issues tied to this asset, but we do have the ability to organize issues by asset. Good for a use case where a company has employees that are specific for certain ranges and want to understand what the vulnerabilities look like within their purview. So that's the digital footprint detail page. I spoke earlier about the ability to challenge attribution. So that can take the form of you telling us that we've attributed something that's not yours. If that's the case, select it, click remove. We then kick off an investigation. Conversely, if we were to miss an asset, you have the ability to correct that as well through the add asset button, where you're going to either input a domain or an IP. Again, we investigate, but if we agree that it is in fact yours, we will add it. So that's the digital footprint section. Next up, I want to talk a little bit about history. Now, let's go back to that vendor risk management story we were talking about earlier. Most of the time, if a company knows it's about to be assessed, they put on their best behavior. They clean up all the things that you're probably looking for. And unfortunately, the second you walk away, they probably revert back to bad habits because bad habits are a lot easier and typically cheaper. For that reason, we don't want to just show you what a company scores today. We want to give you complete visibility into their historical scores for up to 12 months, but we go further than just showing you what the numbers were on certain dates and or points in times. We give you a complete audit log that shows the issues that were present in the then environment. And long and short here is you truly know who you're getting into bed with, right? So that's been something that's very useful for both the self-monitoring and the vendor risk management use cases. So that's our history tab. Next, I want to show you the remediation plan builder. But before I do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we call the invite company workflow. So by virtue of your contract with us, you reserve the right to, we call it invite any of the companies that you're monitoring. And that's at no charge. Neither you nor the company being invited pays for that. And the company that's being invited will retain permanent access to a light version of Scorecard that focuses just on their information. Our thought process here is that for the VRM workflow to be successful, both the vendor and the vendor risk management individual need access to the same information. Our other thought is that with that type of perpetual access, we create a situation where the vendor has an opportunity to improve their score, right? So this goes beyond just this being a vendor risk management monitoring platform. This is a vendor improving platform. And if you think about what I spoke to earlier, which is the relationship between our grades and the risk of breach, you can use this tool to actually reduce breach risk. So you invite the vendor, right? They accept access. So what's the next step? So let's say Morningstar in this example, they're a tier 1 vendor, and your tier 1 vendors need to maintain a grade of at least A. So what we can do is we can propose a score plan, set the grade target, here it's an A, and we generate a plan. And this shows all the issues that they need to remediate in order to get to that score target. So if you combine invite vendor, score plan, and history, we've completed the loop here. You now have the ability to direct your vendors towards improving their scores and the ability to audit and ensure they're upholding their side of the bargain in the agreement. Okay, moving on now. Let's talk about how we add companies. Actually, let's talk about alerting really quickly because that's an important thing to discuss. So continuous monitoring is great, but you also don't want to feel that you need to be in the platform every single day in order to catch wind of something that requires your action. So for that reason, we have an alert workflow. Here is our notification bell. It shows if I have any alerts that have popped up in the environment since I last visited. I have not. What we have the ability to do is configure alert settings where you get alerted if either the overall grade or any of the factor grades either rises or falls, or we can configure a specific threshold, right? So rises above probably wouldn't be a problem, but drops below would be a problem, right? So let's say I'm configuring this for a portfolio of tier 1 vendors. My program says that each tier 1 vendor needs to have at least a grade of 80. I would configure this alert so that I'm notified when any vendor in that portfolio falls below an 80. So I know I just made mention to the concept of portfolio, right? So let's spend a few seconds there. Portfolio is the means in which we organize vendors in our platform. Think of it as a fancy word for the name folder, right? So most folks will group vendors into portfolios that correlate with the way in which they need to report. And that's because with every portfolio, you have what we call the overview tab, which shows summary statistics for all the companies in that portfolio. So think about a situation where I'm looking at my tier 1 portfolio again, the minimum grade requirement for my tier 1s is a 90. I can quickly see here that on average, I'm actually failing in this tier. The average grade is an 86. 47% of the folks in my tier 1 portfolio are above the correct grade, but a lot aren't. Some other interesting pieces of information in the portfolio overview view, we get to see who the worst performing companies are, what the most critical issues are, what the most common issues are, and then down here, we call it the Skittles chart because it kind of looks like the candy Skittles, but essentially what we're showing here is both the current score of all the vendors in this portfolio, as well as what we call the relevant grade trend. So are they falling? Are they rising? Are they low today? Are they high today? Use that information to guide your conversations and ultimately to reduce your risks. Adding companies. Very simple process. Click Add Company. When you add a company in our platform, you do it by domain. So you would type in their domain like a google.com. You would select the portfolio you want them to add to. And when you click Add Company, if the company is in our database, and again, we have 1.3 million companies scored, so there's a high probability it is, we'll automatically render them in the portfolio. If they aren't, we kick off the score generation process. Another big benefit for our platform, is that we're able to generate a new score on a previously unscored entity in 48 hours. And then last but not least, and then we'll turn it over for Q&A. I'm a big fan of using the platform because, again, it is a continuous monitoring solution. So you should take advantage of the benefit of continuous monitoring and see the most updated information in the platform. However, we do have a report generation engine. We have the ability to generate what we call summary reports, which are essentially this view here. It's the overall grade as well as the 10 factors. We also have what we call a detailed report that shows a lot of additional detail. It shows specific issue detections, full list of IPs, so on and so forth. And then lastly, we have the ability to generate an issues report. All right, it looks like I've got about 20 seconds left here, so let's just shoot over to compliance. I talked about PCI in my presentation. I want to quickly show you what this looks like. So again, for any company, whether it be your company or a third party, you have the ability to walk up to their scorecard, select a framework, and we'll give you a quick snapshot as to whether they are complying with controls we can assess or they're not. So here we've mapped what we call positive signals to the specific control. So we believe they're passing it because of these things we didn't detect or did. And down here we see a couple failures against this control. These specific issue detections, they go against the control that we've listed here. So because we're detecting them for this company, we are failing them on that control. All right, that about does it for the demo. I definitely want to make sure we leave some room for a Q&A.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much. We have about 10 minutes left until the hour, so we want to be respectful of everybody's time. We have a couple questions to go over. If we don't get to if we don't get a chance to answer every question, we will be sending out a thank you note, and I'll be glad to coordinate a meeting with Alex for any further questions that we don't get to. Alex, one of the questions that came up during the session was what makes Security Scorecard the only true continuous monitoring solution on the market? There's other products out there that claim to have some sort of analysis. How is Security Scorecard different?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you go back to what I described earlier in terms of the overall process that can be bifurcated into attribution and signals collection, Security Scorecard is the only continuous monitoring solution on the market because we take a continuous approach to attribution. And what I mean is, on a daily basis, we are checking to ensure that the domains and IPs that we've attributed are still relevant, and we're also looking for any new ones that may have popped up between those two scan cycles. If you look at some of the other folks in the market, they take a manual approach to attribution, and it's typically something that's not refreshed very frequently. And what I mean is, when they want to go and score a company, they'll kick their request to an offshore team who's going to go look for all of the assets that they think belong to a company. And then once they've established that list of assets, they really just continuously monitor that static list of assets, right? So on day one, that might be an accurate score, but with every passing day, because domains and IPs are things that rotate, the likelihood that they're monitoring the wrong assets gets higher and higher. So that is why we are the only true continuous monitoring solution.
Great, thank you. Do you have your slide, the Q&A slide up, Alex, just to go through these?
I do. It should be showing. I guess it's not.
We'll give it a sec. A second question that came up in chat was, is it possible to exclude an IP? You know, one of the clients or one of their IPs addressed as a honeypot, so that shouldn't be included in their overall score.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a feature, we didn't get to it today, but it's called Custom Scorecard. And essentially the way Custom Scorecard works is you have the ability to create segments within the domains and IPs that have been attributed to your company. And once we've established one of those segments, we can create a score that just looks at those assets in those segments. So, you know, classic example is the guest Wi-Fi network, right? You don't have control over what's going on there. It's guests who are bring your own devices. So the issues that exist on that network, they're not really things you can control, nor should they be attributed to your company. So what companies will do is they'll create a custom scorecard that only looks at the corporate assets and excludes the guest network. Or if we're talking about, a security company that has an active honeypot, I mean, the goal of a honeypot is to get infected, right? So what they would do is they would exclude the ranges tied to the honeypot from their scorecard, so the intentional infections in the honeypot are not bringing their overall score down.
Great. Thank you for that clarity. Another question that came up is licensing based on company name or domains?
It's based on company, right? So in our system, when you feed us a top level domain, we go out and identify all the other domains that belong to that company, right? And then we include them in a single scorecard. So our licensing is based on the number of companies you're concurrently monitoring. It doesn't matter how many domains that company has, unless the company has decided to break out segments of itself into custom scorecards, in which case every custom scorecard you want to monitor counts towards your license count. The other thing that I'd mention on the subject of licenses is, and this is a big differentiator for us, we have flexible licenses, meaning we're not selling you the right to monitor a specific company, we're selling you the right to monitor a company. And with that, you have the ability to rotate companies in and out of your licenses. So in terms of operationalizing that, what we typically see is companies will continuously monitor their tier 1 and tier 2 vendors, and maybe they'll have a allocation of license slots that they're going to rotate lower critical tier vendors in and out of.
How about subsidiaries? I mean, obviously, a different entity or a different company that's owned by a parent company, how would that work with the licensing?
Yeah, so if the subsidiary was broken out from the parent scorecard, which it probably would be, it would count as a separate license. Now, sometimes though, I know on the surface, the subsidiary feels and looks like a separate entity, but there are still a lot of situations where there are direct connections between the network, things that could result in a situation where a problem at the sub level could be a problem at the parent level. So that's our reason for initially grouping them under the same scorecard if that type of connection exists. Does that make sense? Hello?
Did you hear that question? So sorry. Did you, yeah, I think it's clear. Another question that came up is, do you factor cybersecurity insurance held by a third party into account on your scoring?
We don't, because if you think about cyber insurance, that's not going to necessarily prevent an attack from happening. It's going to mitigate the potential financial losses and business disruptions that can be triggered by a attack, right? So again, we're trying to give you a view into the risk of breach, not necessarily the financial ramifications of a breach.
Understood. Understood. And another question that came up is, can this replace an external penetration test, like in a PCI assessment or some sort of requirement for an external penetration test?
Yeah, so again, we're limited to only looking at publicly facing assets, and we don't necessarily have the benefit of being on site to knock on doors with our tool, right? So in that regard, there's certain elements of a pen test that cannot be replaced one-to-one with our platform. The biggest use case for pen testing is, again, establishing a grade threshold where the company is so strong that you feel confident enough to skip the pen test, or using the factor grades or specific issue detections to provide guidance on the vectors and areas of the company that you want to pen test. So we call it kind of right-sizing the pen test.
Got it. So it's an interesting conversation to have with your auditor.
Yes, 100%.
Are there any limitations on the type of companies security scorecard can score?
That's a great question.
Is that
there has to be a public facing asset, but no, we have no limitation in terms of the size of the company, the geographic region. It's definitely one of our biggest competitive differentiators, right? A lot of our competitors struggle to score smaller companies or companies in certain regions because there's a big element of their scoring process that is manual and human driven. Because we've automated attribution and turned it into a continuous process, we're not inhibited by that. So the answer is no.
Got it. And this is something that came up as well, is how frequently are the scores refreshed? Is it per day? Is it per month? Is it per quarter? How does this work?
Daily.
Wow.
Daily
Okay.
refresh. Yep.
Well, that's great to know. All right. So how long does it take to generate a report once you've put it in there for assessing?
Yeah, so the report generation once a company is scored is instant, right? There's no real lag on that. If the question is more so focused on how long will it take us to generate a score for a company that we weren't scoring before, the answer is about 48 hours time.
Got it.
And if you look at some of the competition out there, those lead times to generate a new score can be weeks, they can be longer, and in some situations, like I alluded to before, they simply don't have the ability to score certain companies.
So if we had if a client had a specific need for a specific kind of report that wasn't generated out of box, how would that work?
Yeah, so we have a very robust and extensive REST API. We've built the front-end platform as the same endpoint as our API because we're committed to delivering feature parity and front-end performance on the API. So with our API, you have the ability to pull a top-level grade, 10-factor grades, as well as the number of finding counts for every issue type. So to answer your question, Orencio, what folks will do in that situation is they'd likely bring the data elements that they want to build the report with into some other area or platform to build the report in and use our API to extract the information.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Alex. I think there's been a great presentation, and we thank you very much. I like to respect everybody's time. It's 12 o'clock. Have a lovely time and be safe out there. And we are very thankful for your ability to join us today. We'll be glad to coordinate any meetings with Alex for any further questions. Take care. Have a lovely day.
Thank you, everyone. Looking
Bye-bye.
forward to working with all of you.